Hello, and you are listening to EcoJustice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. EcoJustice Radio acknowledges that we record the show on the traditional territory of the Tongva and all of their relatives. Welcome, I am Jack Eit. On today's show, from Degradation to Regeneration, John Roulac's Eco Vision. I will be interviewing John Roulac, founder of Nutiva and executive producer of the recently premiered documentary film Common Ground. John Roulac sourced and formulated organic superfoods at his company Nutiva that have generated over $1 billion in retail sales. John is a serial entrepreneur, investor, writer, philanthropist, and the executive producer of the Netflix hit film Kiss the Ground and the latest Common Ground, which both focus on regenerative agriculture. Furthermore, John has established 6 nonprofit organizations, including Great Plains Regeneration, Agroforestry, Regeneration Communities, and Forests Forever, showcasing his commitment to environmental and social causes. 200 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, the rivers across North America ran clear and blue. Beginning in the 1800s, the growth of manufacturing and agriculture brought prosperity, but at the great cost of unmitigated pollution. While the food industry has been focused on profitability, their agricultural practices have resulted in rainstorms washing pesticides, fertilizers, feedlot manure, and bare soil into our waterways and oceans, turning rivers from clear reflections of blue skies to hues of greenish brown. And human health has suffered along with that flow. Our guest today delivers the good news. There are profitable and earth-friendly ways to grow nutrient-dense food, draw down carbon to address climate chaos, and return our rivers to their natural blue appearance. John Roulac is with us today to discuss his many nonprofit organizations and 2 documentary films focused on soil regeneration as an important way forward. John illuminates the harsh realities of our industrial agricultural practices and presents a pretty serious case for a regenerative revolution. From the loss of winged insects to the acidification of oceans, he puts it all out there in terms of the environmental crisis, and he brings it to the personal of how we are suffering from all of this poison that is at hand to feed us. We discuss how we can transform degraded lands into flourishing ecosystems and why sustainable agriculture isn't enough. We get into how regenerative agriculture restores biodiversity, improves food security, and can heal our planet. Thank you for tuning in to EcoJustice Radio and our show From Degradation to Regeneration, John Roulac's Eco Vision. I'm your host, Jack Eit. It is my honor to welcome our guest, John Roulac, founder of Nutiva and executive producer of the recently premiered film Common Ground. Welcome to EcoJustice Radio.
Thank you for inviting me here today.
Great to have you here. So John Roulac, I met you at a recent premiere in Los Angeles of the regenerative agriculture movie you executive produced called Common Ground. I knew about your work at the health food company Nutiva, and you're involved in a number of other projects that we're going to talk about. The through line in these efforts is what is called regeneration of land, soil, and ecosystems through agriculture and agroforestry. So what does regeneration mean to you?
Regeneration is just simply taking, I'll kind of explain what is degenerative agriculture. And that's where much of the current system, where over every year, over the seasons, you're losing more topsoil, you're losing organic matter, you're losing more biodiversity, losing more bees, more butterflies, more soils washing away into the rivers. Then about 30 years ago, some smart people came along and says, well, let's do sustainable agriculture. Let's just try to do less bad and sustain the degraded system we're in. Imagine if you had a relationship and it wasn't doing so well and you said, hey, honey, can we sustain this relationship a little more?
Yeah.
It's not going to fly too well, but how about, can we regenerate? Can we be regenerative in our connection? I think that might work better, right? Regenerative agriculture, which I first started really to make the connection about regenerative agriculture as this kind of a new paradigm, a new kind of new word, a new meme, in the kind of the lexicon of our culture was 10 years ago, was that we can take degraded lands and restore them. You can take soils that have been degraded from farming and increase the organic matter and make it more viable. We can take watersheds that the water is eroding and we can slow that water down and we can encourage to have beavers and other natural wildlife come back and have more wild animals, more natural habitat and regenerate nature. So that's a little longer an answer than a quick one, but
No, that's great. And we've covered a lot of this in a number of different shows, but the reality is we've got these massive problems with industrial agriculture, recently driving through the arid Central Valley. And all it is monocrop fields kept alive with imported water sprayed with toxic pesticides and herbicides next to concentrated cattle feeding operations. So we know about this. There's another way of doing it. And your motto from all of your different businesses and the work that you've been doing is protecting the environment is good business. So how do we get industrial agriculture to buy into the vision?
yeah. Well, my simple motto is let's regenerate. And to understand the dire situation we're at, I encourage people to do the windshield test. Now, it's harder for younger people, but those of us who've lived, more than 3 or 4 decades, remember driving through agricultural areas. And after you drove through the Central Valley, your windshield would be full of insects. You'd have to pull over when you got gas and really clean off all these bugs. Now, when you drive through there, your windshield is clean. What's happened? Industrial agriculture through these pesticides and specifically neonics, which we can get into later, which is a class, it's what they dip every GMO seed and also conventional seed. And regenerative farmers are working to buy seeds that are not dipped in this chemical, which kills bees. We've lost, through research from testing, we've lost 75% of all winged insects since the 1970s. Now imagine how many winged insects we've lost from 1850 to 1975. In the last 40 years, we've lost 75%. We're now, in the next decade, we're losing 1 to 2% per year. We're talking about ladybugs, butterflies. When's the last time you walked in a field? I'm going to ask the listeners, when's the last time you walked in a field and turned around and saw 4 or 5 butterflies fly? I can't remember it. And the same thing's happening in the oceans with plankton. So when we look at biodiversities, there's two key indicator species that are indicators of importance of ecosystems and the situation. Because when you lose insects, what do you think birds eat? Birds eat insects. So bird populations are crashing. So insect populations crashing, bird populations are crashing, and now for the first time, human population is starting to crest. And I believe when they say that there's going to be 10 billion people by 2050, which is what Monsanto says, and a lot of environmentalists and food companies, I'd say we'll be lucky if there's 1 billion or 2 people by 2040, just because when you get rid of all the insects, what's going to pollinate the food? And then also in the plankton, we've lost over 60% of ocean plankton. And where do you think we get our oxygen from? What's the largest source in the world of oxygen? From the ocean, from the plankton. 60%, about 2 out of 3 breaths come from the ocean. So we're actually reducing oxygen levels on the planet. And literally what's happening is the acidification is increased by 30%. And it's both of these factors, the collapse of insects and the collapse of ocean plankton, is caused from degradation of nature vis-a-vis industrial agriculture. So all that excess carbon that we used to have in the soils and from the tilling, as well as burning coal and oil, it goes up into the atmosphere and then it floats down and it lands into the ocean. We're an ocean planet. 70% of the surface of the earth is ocean. And then that carbon adds to the acidification, and the plankton don't live very, very well in an acidic environment. In fact, if you take a petri dish and you put in plankton and you put in the acidification of what scientists say will be in 2040 at our current rate with no change, no plankton grows. Now, when was the last time a United States environmental organization discussed these two issues? Did the Sierra Club discuss it? Did the NRDC discuss it? NRDC discusses oceans, luckily. They do a little of that.
They do.
They have done some good work, but the challenge is we're keep talking about this nebulous term called climate change. And that's part of my critique of the modern climate movement and the environmental movement. We're so fixated on this battle against the evil coal and oil. And I get that, burning coal and, and petroleum with 8 billion people, and everybody wants an iPhone and everybody wants to fly in an airplane is not a good choice. But there's other things besides just that. And so agriculture, if we get agriculture right, we can solve the habitat collapse of insects. We can take that excess carbon that's in the ocean. Instead of putting more carbon in the ocean, we can take that carbon and we can return it back to the soil where it belongs. We can also increase nutrition in our food. We can improve our health. We can make our farmers less likely to kill themselves. It's the highest suicide rate as farmers. And we can let them create a better world. How we do that, though, is more complex. But that's I'm on this kind of, I joke, a fool's errand to see if we can change the course of industrial agriculture, which basically has the fate of humanity in its hands.
Yeah, well, part of your, I would say, very intelligent so-called fool's errand is the making of two recent films, which Kiss the Ground was released a few years ago, streaming on Netflix, and now Common Ground, which will be streaming soon. Can you tell us about those films?
Yeah. Well, 10 years ago, after I saw one of my mentors and friends, Will Allen, give a talk, what he called, regenerative agriculture, and I had no idea the amount of pollution globally and CO2 that agriculture was producing. Even though I'd been in the food business, I mean, I knew it was bad. And I actually wrote a book on composting in the 1990s. But when I heard that, I then just started reaching out to people, including my good friend Ryland from Kiss the Ground book, the movie is named after. And so I started talking to people, my organic friends and people in the natural food business, as being back then I was CEO of Nativa, the organic food brand that I founded in 1999. And nobody seemed to be talking about it. And there was no interest. None of the environmentalists, they were like, soil health, agriculture and climate. No, one of them even said, John, we can't talk about that. If we talk about that, then they'll just give up then they'll just take their eye on the ball of not burning coal and oil, and we could just do solar and wind, end of subject. So I was like, well, okay, we just shouldn't talk about it, shouldn't do anything. We got to just deal with oil and coal. And the reality is, what people don't want to hear, every major corporation that is the top ones with the the ESG and net zero carbon emissions by 2030 or 2050, all those corporations, even the ones who have good CEOs that are doing the best they can, they love their kids, they're generally nice people, all of those, and including the environmentalists, if you really get to them and if you give them a beer or you get them not on camera, they all know there's no there in replacing oil and coal at our current, talk about AI. You know how much AI is coming along? AI is just, we need a new coal burning power plant for every next AI company that comes along. And there's lots of them. And they can't build the solar. The solar and wind is just going to take up the increase. It's not going to retire all these plants. We're burning so much fuel. So we have to look at our environmental footprint. We need to be working on, we have tracks from San Diego to San Francisco. Why can't I take a train to San Francisco? We have a track there. And they say, well, you got to get off the train and get a bus for an hour.
Yeah, I know it.
Literally. We call ourselves environmentalists. We call ourselves the greatest country in the world. And I can't even get on a train to go to San Francisco or to San Diego. And some people do. I see the trains rolled down every once in a while.
Yeah, look at the debacle of high-speed rail, which is a very important push.
But it has devolved into regulatory turf battles. I would add that I would be more optimistic about our ability to transition to clean, renewable energy with significant conservation.
But you are correct that we're not doing it. We're not taking it serious. So I think your point is really well taken,
Yeah.
that we need to do
And
a lot of.
so while we figure out what that next way to get off of all this coal, and I know there's lots of people working on solutions and there's some innovative technologies and there's better batteries and there's better solar coming, and let's hope we come some of that. But in the meantime, what are we going to do with a legacy load of carbon in the atmosphere? And so back in 2013, I was wrapping my heads around and I said, maybe we should just do a film. So we partnered up with Josh and Rebecca Tickell, and I met them, and they're great filmmakers, and they knew Ryland, and I handed the baton, and they like have taken it farther than I ever could have imagined. And so we did this Kiss the Ground film. It took us about 7 years, so many twists and turns, and I helped raise a bunch of money for it, and helped on various projects on the film, and it did very well. Unfortunately, it was with COVID, so we couldn't show it in movie theaters. And then we decided to do a follow-up film, Common Ground, and that just released in New York last June at Tribeca. Won an award. It's been winning one award at EMA, Environmental Media Association, and been getting great reviews. And it basically just follows several of the leaders in regenerative agriculture, Gabe Brown, Ray Archuleta, two of my kind of heroes and mentors.
Absolutely.
One of the things that is different about this regenerative agriculture movement, and 10 years ago, I was what you would call, I mean, I was like one of the biggest fans and champions of organic agriculture. When I was in my 20s, I said, we're going to create an organic world. I said, we're just going to we're going to switch over. Nobody was interested in organic in the 80s. They thought that was just some crazy idea, and we've come a long way. But when you look back at it, Lady Balfour from the United Kingdom was the one that proposed organic agriculture to the West. That was almost 80 years ago. What do you think the percentage of certified organic acres are in 2024, almost 80 years later? Guess what it is in the United States? It's a smidge over 0.5%.
Wow.
So I realized in 2013 as that my life's work to create this organic world had failed. I like the movement, and it was like, yeah, organic sales were like 6%, but where was all the food coming from? It was coming internationally. Like it was coming the Nativa coconut oil, Dr. Bronner's soap. That was all produced all internationally. Chia seeds, sunflower oil, cacao. That's all grown. So, and 10 years later, I realized I made the right decision that organic was not the horse to ride on, because farmers weren't interested, and the whole economic, social, political structure is against organic. We could talk for 10 hours about why that's the case, but it's you go to a small town in the Midwest and you say, who wants to be an organic farmer? They look at you like, you got three heads. They're not interested in that. And nobody who's sipping latte, Sebastopol or Del Mar or Ventura is going to change their mind. They really laugh. And what we go, organic's the future. Well, I was saying that for 25 years. And then I said, well, I met Ray and Gabe, and they're not preaching organic, but they're preaching soil health. And I'm like, tell me, preach to me, brother. How are we going to do this? And they said, well, look, they've been farming and ranching and working with farmers for decades, way more than I work with farmers, but they live in those areas and they said, John, we need to reach the farmer where they're at. We need to reach where they're at, and we need to work with them. And we go step by step. After a couple of years in their programs, they get farmers and they'll reduce their fertilizer by 30%. And they'll get rid of all the fungicides. They're not going to use any more fungicides. Now they're still going to use some glyphosate. I don't like that. Do you want glyphosate in your smoothie or your cereal? No, I don't want it. You don't want it. And no, a lot of people. But if we insist that the only way regenerative agriculture is going to work is with certified organic, we're going to go to those small towns where the farmers are, and they're just going to laugh at us, and they're just going to go, forget it. And we have to work with them and not make them wrong. And so I've had to be kind of humble, and I've had to reassess. And that's kind of what the purpose of this film and working with, how can we work with these farmers and show them that in their mind, instead of saying you're wrong and we're going to penalize you for living a life that you learned at college. And this is what they learned from their dad. Their dad told them, this is something, we go out and plow the fields. It's like a mind shift. But the good news is more farmers are starting to do this. And if we show them they get the success, then a light bulb will go on. And it's really like, oh, I could increase the natural vitality of our farm and still make money. In fact, as Gabe Brown likes to say, instead of signing the front of the check to buy more ingredients, he'll sign the back of the check and make more income. So regenerative agriculture, sometimes the yield will be a little less, but the output of chemicals is slashed. And so to me, if we could get 15% of the farmers to practice regenerative agriculture and cut half their chemical use, that's going to be way better than if we could get 10,000 new small organic veggie farms. Not that we can't do both. If you would have asked me, the younger self, the fiery environmentalist, when I was 35 or 40, who was at the destruction of the environment, I'd be, no way, just stop all the chemicals. But I'm now in my 60s, and when I take my last breath on this planet, I hope I can look back and go, I was part of making a better future, and we accomplished something. And that was the idea behind these films and the spirit of regenerative agriculture. And the last thing I'd just like to say is the beautiful thing about regenerative agriculture movement, it brings together Trump country, conservative farmers and ranchers, and West Coast and East Coast, liberals or environmentalists or organic foodies or permaculture, all sorts of different things come together in a common bond around regeneration. And that in itself is a beautiful thing. And that is regenerative.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you for that. And we're going to go to a quick break and come back with John Roulac. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you're listening to From Degradation to Regeneration, John Roulac's EcoVision. I'm your host, Jack Ide, and our guest is John Roulac, founder of Nutiva and executive producer of the recently premiered documentary film, Common Ground. Welcome back with John Roulac. We're talking about regenerative agriculture and the good process to transition away from a very destructive industrial agricultural system. We've done shows. We actually did a show with Ray Archuleta, who you referred to in the last segment. Amazing guy, a leader on the regenerative scene. But we also did shows recently with Zen Honeycutt from Moms Across America and Kelly Ryerson from Glyphosate Facts. And they're also featured in your film Common Ground for their dedicated advocacy work. And you can look up those shows on our podcast archives, listeners. So, and you've referred to genetically modified organisms. The question is how they work hand in hand with pesticides, like you did mention neonicotinoids, and herbicides like glyphosate. Tell us what we're dealing with here.
Yeah. And first, before that, I wanted to mention, I'm glad you had Ray on your show. And I've been working to do a Pacific Northwest regen tour with Ray Archuleta and one of my friends, Alejandro Carrillo, which is a rancher from northern Mexico.
We had him on too.
Excellent.
Great people, both of them.
So we're gonna go in June. We're gonna do 1 day workshop, a road trip all over Central Oregon and Central and Eastern Washington, and work with farmers and ranchers and conservation districts. And that's going to be in June. So we're looking forward to getting the word out on that. I'm helping organize that.
Great.
With the Spokane Conservation District. But so in terms of GMO, every GMO that Monsanto sells, and their main GMO crops are GMO sugar beets, GMO corn, GMO canola, GMO soy, GMO cotton. And those are 90% of GMO crops in the world are 95 are those main commodities. They don't really focus on a lot of others. And every one of those seeds are dipped in neonicotinoid, which is it's like this bluish green powder. It's one of the most toxic substances. It's more toxic than Roundup. It's in nurseries in California. So homeowners are planting them unwittingly in their yards and poisoning biodiversity. And so you need to ask your nurseries, is this product have neonicotinoids? And there's bills that it tried to get scaled back in New York, but the New York governor acquiesced to the pesticide industry. And guess who's the largest seller of neonicotinoids in the world? Bayer. Guess who
Yes.
bought Monsanto? Bayer. Guess who was the original chemical company that made chemicals that were used on humans during World War II in Germany? Bayer. So they have quite the legacy. Ironically, I was on a debate stage with one of the top executives from Bayer. I actually liked the guy because he was willing to actually get on the stage and talk to me. I was pretty tough on him. So I was just saying, like, this guy is like, because usually Monsanto executives aren't willing to do that because so it's
Well, that he must have been hired to be the guy who gets up on the stage and deals with
yeah.
people
Oh,
like
yeah.
you.
Yeah. He was good. It was in Italy though, and they had a bunch of other people on the stage. But anyways, so GMOs are designed, these crops are designed to take glyphosate, which glyphosate, the development was, it was originally used as a way to descale, tanks, industrial tanks. You put it in there, it strips the minerals. So that's real, it's like a mineral stripping. And so that's what originally was. And then they modified it and turned it herbicide to kill weeds. But then they were able to grow plants that you can spray the chemical directly onto the corn and not have the corn die. And so then this way, like I remember a farmer, he says, John, see those fields? There's not a weed in that field. You could be a 16-year-old and farm that. You just like put the combine and, forward, put on some Led Zeppelin or some rap music and just drive the tractor. You're not getting off, look at the soil. You're not trying to see what's going on. So that's GMOs, and these chemicals are, and one of the other chemicals that's very common in agriculture today is atrazine.
Yeah,
And
horrible.
atrazine is one of the most, that's what they spray with the corn. And atrazine, there's a professor that was at UC Berkeley, and the manufacturers of the atrazine tried to get him fired, and he did research. It basically, when they put the frogs in a water environment, the male frogs turn to female frogs, and it changes the chromosome at the sexual chromosome level. And what we've seen on the human side in the last 50 or 60 years, it coincides with kind of this modern living, whether it's plastics, whether it's pesticides, whether it's in the pharmaceutical drugs or vaccines, nobody knows exactly, but there was 1 in 10,000 autistic kids when like for instance, Jack, when you and I were growing up, there were didn't hardly see anyone. Now it's 1 out of 40 boys. They project it might be 1 out of 5 or 10 boys, by 2035 or 2040. And there never was a fertility clinic. If you're in an urban area, there's a fertility clinic in an urban area every mile. They didn't have fertility clinics. There was no
Yeah,
such
so the term endocrine disruptors, it's we've been hearing this term, but what does it really mean? It means that reproduction is disrupted. I mean, the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. And to give you an example, male grip strength is down like 30 or 40% in the last 40 years. Sperm levels are down by 50%. There is an impact on the human population. And I like to say we're 4th generation in this study. So we're basically lab rats. I did a campaign, we didn't talk about this, but I did a campaign in 2012 and 2013 using GMOs, and our symbol was a grocery shopping cart and a lab rat, and Cheerios was our like star product in this campaign. We said, Cheerios, take the GMOs out of your product, which they ended up doing after 14 months because we put 40,000 comments. And Moms Against America, Zen was helping us with that campaign, and so did a bunch of other people, the Food Babe and different things. So, but essentially, anyone who's been in the last, if you were in the United States and Europe, we've been spraying pesticides on all our crops. We introduced plastics. So for those who are like 3rd or 4th generation, it transmits so you get it in the food, you eat the food that's in the atrazine, it's in the glyphosate, you get the plastic from the water bottle in the plastic food, and then it gets transferred from the male, from the semen to mom. It gets transferred into the mom's breast milk. The breast milk has the atrazine, glyphosate, has all these chemicals in the breast milk. It's also, goes in through the placenta. And now the 2nd generation one has it. And then the 2nd generation even has more pesticides, herbicides, because and now they pass it to the 3rd generation. And today we're the 4th generation. most people will say that by the fifth or sixth generation, like I talk about these things, we've gotten to this situation where we are living in a human experiment from these drug companies and these chemical companies. And I kind of like joke, like a lot of people don't like to hang out with me because I bring up these subjects. I'm not really that fun, I can be kind of entertaining and whatever, but they know at some point I might just like give them the lowdown of what's going on. And I mean, I've been an environmental activist for 40 years. They dumped nuclear waste when I was 21 years old. And when I was living in Pasadena, that's when I decided to take my life purpose was how do we live on this earth without destroying it? And there's a lot of good options, but our society has gotten so corrupted. I like to say when you go to Washington, D.C., logic and reason have no basis. There's
Well,
no logic or reason. It's money and power. And so we have to do what we can in our local communities and through what we purchase and our friends and the businesses we support. And that's why, like when you go to the grocery store, don't buy the junk food. Go to the farmer's market if you can.
All right, we talked about farms and the regenerative solutions that aren't being adopted the way they should, but there still are some properly produced. How can people eat better and shop better to avoid this dangers?
Well, I'll give you start off with like my health tips. This is the first thing I get people to do is we have to start with ourselves. When I look out and I go, I'm pissed at the world. Well, what's going on? Well, what about my life, John? What are you doing? So we got to start here, right? We got to start with ourselves. And so one thing you can do for your own health is to do the yoga plank. It takes 30 seconds a day, and it'd be amazing. I've helped a lot of people get stronger just by doing that. You lose weight, you'll have less pain, So that's one thing. A walk, do something physically fit that physical activity you like. And then in terms of food, just look to buy more organic. It doesn't have to necessarily be, you can go to the farmer's market, find people who are just not spraying chemicals. Not everybody's certified organic. Look to see like if their produce looks all perfect, if you see something that's maybe they're a little smaller, or there's a little whatever bug bites, well, then they're not spraying. If everything's giant, looks all perfect, then you might, they might be using more, chemicals. So farmer's market is really important. Find out a local, like some people purchase meat, and meat can be regenerative. In our film, we show how it's really important. Cattle, can be, and grazers can mimic, the wild animals and restore, and that's what you've had Ray Archuleta and Alejandro on before. They explain that, better than I can. But that's really, really important. That's what's in the films. So eating meat that's produced in a more regenerative manner, and less packaged foods. Buy less things in plastic. Like when I go to the store, when I buy produce, I don't put it each in a plastic bag. I don't put the carrots in a plastic bag. I don't put the beets in a plastic bag. I just put them, the person who checks out is going, wow, you got a lot of water on my counter here, but they wipe it up a little. But I'd rather that than have plastic bags,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So more local, and try some different recipes and things, and doing that, and less junk food, less sugar. I'm a big fan of chaga, which is a mushroom it's actually really it's a fungus. I recommend a brand called Birch Boys, but I do chaga tea. It's a fungus that more and more doctors are researching. Not many people know about it. You want the wild chaga. And I make teas with it. I put rosemary and oregano and different herbs that I grow in my garden. So we don't necessarily need to buy teas. If you live even if you live in an apartment, you can grow, mints. You can grow rosemary makes great tea. It's very good for you. So these are some of the simple things we can do, and just learn, just to be open to trying some things,
Yeah, that's great. To shift a little bit, you've done significant work establishing smallholder farms, practicing agroforestry and food forests in East Africa and Guatemala. Let's start with Guatemala. I have a lot of experience living down there. I've got some friends doing a macadamia tree reforestation project as an alternative to the slash and burn agriculture on the steep hillsides. But what you're working on has many different types of foods grown into different ecosystems. Can you explain what that project's all about?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm a co-founder with agroforestry regeneration communities. And how this came about is I have a fund that I set aside from some of the money that I've made in my natural food business. And so I've been giving that away to programs around the world. And two of the programs, one was in Guatemala and one was in Malawi in East Africa. And I noticed those were the ones that were like, they were like, wow, they've made some really good progress. And I really liked what they were doing. So I said, why don't we just create a platform and support this instead of me just working on a couple projects only? So we formed this, and we're really a network of these groups. So we don't really start new programs. We find existing change agents in the area. So really, I'm the guy who finds these change agents. I watch them. We give them a little money. We see how they do, and then we give them a little more. Give them a little advice, but also realize that, like, hey, they don't necessarily need to hear from some older dude who thinks he knows what he's talking about all the time. So yeah, they like the money we give them, and we, I try to give them a little advice how to deal with people and stuff. But I always try to this is their project. I'm their ally. I'm their fan. And one of the projects in Guatemala, we were very fortunate. So there's a gentleman named Sean. He and his buddy formed this group called Contour Lines, and their idea was to plant agroforestry to replace the slash and burn. 300 years ago, slash and burn was a good form of agriculture, because they would go into the forest and they would slash and burn 1 or 2 acres. They would plant it and they would grow it, and the soil would be productive. And then after 10 or 12 years, they would just abandon it, and the forest would regrow back in, and it would be a new forest. And then they would go to another area, and then they could come back somebody would come back 100 years later and do it again. But now, through colonialization, through industrial agriculture, higher populations, there's more challenges to do that. So we work with the poorest smallholder farmers. People have less than 1 or 2 hectares of land. And they usually don't have bank accounts. They have dirt floors. They don't have indoor plumbing. They basically are discriminated against. There's 500 million of these farmers. When we talk about, if we wanted to improve biodiversity in the world, work with the small farmers. You want to improve food security in the world, work with small farmers. Yeah. You want to work with women, children, and their health, work with these small farmers. You feel like you've been privileged and you're in the north and you're a Caucasian and you want to do something. Well, you could also work with 500 million of these small farmers. And 95% of small farmers have disappeared who are Black in the United States. And there's this very small number because of discrimination and all sorts of things. So there's such a win. So we work with these farmers. And so this program there is they go, and a lot of these areas are hilly, so they don't have the best land. So they plant on contour, and it's the best way to plant, where so they will say, you go and you put down the organic matter and you do it on the ley line, which we show you, and we come back. And in 30 days, if they do that, and they only do it if the women and the children are involved. If it's just the amigo, sorry, we don't work with you. If the family's not there, sorry, we'll come back next year. So they get the message real quick. And so we get the kids involved. Now imagine those 7-year-old kids. They don't have hardly any food. They're only growing maize. They're using herbicides. Now we get the pick. They pick a mango. They pick an avocado. They pick a citrus. They pick a jackfruit, whatever the types. And we're also now including cacao. And so for every one of those fruit trees, we plant 5 or 6 nitrogen fixing trees. And in 2 years, all of a sudden these trees are growing. They don't need to fertilize them, because the tree crops that are the nitrogen factories, essentially, they grow up, and then they chop them, they prune them, and all those leaves become nitrogen for the soil. That feeds the trees. Then we also do what we call our alley crops. So in between these agroforestry systems, we do alley crops. We grow pineapple, we grow cassava, which we then at the contour lines, we turn into a flour, and we're replacing wheat, and we're making we have a hip gluten-free bakery in Antigua, and that tourists come, and some of the locals, and Sean's wife, Nicte. And I just got her a $15,000 grant from One Earth Foundation. I didn't get it. I mean, I introduced them and they did a lot of the work. And so we're doing grants for semi-small farmers to get cacao, to dry the cacao, and that they can export it and also use it at the cafe. We're also growing turmeric and ginger and sugar cane. And we take some of the sugar cane and we make cane juice. And some of these products are being used at the center, but we need to create more markets. And now all of a sudden, 3 years later, that 7-year-old kid is now 10. What do you think he thinks about when he comes to dinner and his mom's got avocados, mangoes? Kid's going, wow, this is great. Do you think
Yeah,
he's interested in agriculture now when all he got
absolutely.
before was a bowl of gruel from corn, some cornmeal or tortillas? And I'll tell you one story. There was an old man, maybe not an old man, but like a farmer, and he'd never grown pineapples. He grew like 100 pineapples. He had to carry them from the field by himself all the way down to a little creek. Probably took him a couple times. Then he loaded into his boat. He went on that little creek to a bigger creek. He took he went to the bigger creek. He went to the town, unloaded them. He went to the roadside, sold the pineapples for $1 each. He had $100 in Livingston, Guatemala. That's kind of thing that we can change. And so because I have kind of I'm a little provocative on my LinkedIn. I meet people all the time, like people go, wow, John, you say what's on your mind. So a lot of people follow me on LinkedIn because I go after Joe Biden, I'll go after Trump, I'll go after, the EU, I'll go after the UN, I go after George Soros, so I go after Monsanto. I got him $4 million to go into Guatemala. We now have 0.7% of all farmers doing this program because I got it from One Tree Planted, and the band that's supporting is called Coldplay.
There you go. Well, that's pretty amazing. We're going to unleash you on going after all those entities and individuals in the next segment. So let's take a quick break and we'll be back. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you're listening to From Degradation to Regeneration, John Roulac's Eco-Vision. I'm your host, Jack Ide, and our guest is John Roulac, founder of Nutiva and executive producer of the recently premiered documentary film, Common Ground. Well, we're back with John Roulac. So we've seen you stepping out of the mainstream. We've been walking along the edge of the mainstream in the whole interview here. So we like it. And taking a stand, you've been taking a stand for natural, organic, and holistic approach to personal health, as well as, health of the land. I'm also very much an advocate of using adaptogenic herbs, vitamin supplements to strengthen the immune system and avoid getting sick. But we live in a system where pharmaceutical drugs dominate the healthcare system in much the way that industrial agriculture dominates the food system. You refer to this as a culture war. Can you share with us your approach?
First, I want to share. Yeah, I'll say when I was 40 years old, I got bit by a tick, and I've been bit by many ticks walking in the forest in Northern California. This one, though, seemed to be the one. After a year and a half of trying to understand what happened, I discovered I had Lyme disease, and I essentially was a semi-cripple. It was a journey for me to walk up a stair. And I had a hard time walking. I could never play basketball. I couldn't do a lot. And I was suing the DEA at the time because they said my hemp bars were the same category as heroin. Western doctor told me every antibiotic, and I didn't have insurance. I was spending $10,000 a year on it. And I kept getting worse and worse and worse. And someone just called me up and said, hey, you got to talk to this person. I did. I found out. And I ended up going to a clinic in Mexico. The doctor said, just stop taking all that stuff you're doing. Come down here. I took 6 days of ozone therapy, blood into my blood, IV ozone with energetic oxygen. And in 6 days, I could run after being a cripple for a year and a half. And I called back my medical doctor, and he wouldn't get me back. He wouldn't get back on the phone. And so I take a view of the pharmaceutical world with being a cripple from their system. It also helped kill my dad with a heart drug that he got allergic reaction to and died. So I've kind of seen the personal thing. And I'm not against pharmaceutical drugs. They have their place, and when you need them, you want them, and think that they're available there, right? We don't need to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
But
I could say I've survived multiple illnesses that have been solved by modern pharmaceutical
yeah,
drugs. So there
yeah,
is their place.
yeah, there's their place. But I wrote an article on pharma's culture war, and essentially, if you would have said that the pharmaceutical drugs is the solution that's been genetically modified 10 years ago, most Democrats and liberals would go, nah, don't think so. Republicans would go, yeah, we should just trust the science. And then it switched, and it switched in a very unusual way. And I got into that article. And partly Donald Trump was the central character in it. They basically, in my view, Trump is the best president the military industrial complex and the pharmaceutical drugs ever had, because they basically used Trump as the dog to kick. And then if you don't want the dog that we're kicking, that's the bad one, we're your daddy. And so basically you take otherwise smart people who then believe, like, if you take our generation, if you take the boomers and you go back when we were in the 1980s and we were in the 20s and 30s and said, okay, now, do you believe the talking heads on TV, the media, and advertisement, do you believe them about making wars in foreign countries? No. Do you believe them for drugs? What medical approaches we should take to infectious diseases? No. Do you believe that we should listen to them on what about nutrition and foods and what we should do with our immune system? No. Virtually most people of our age now, the boomers, would said no to that in the 80s and 90s. And they say yes to it in 2024. And that is the culture war. It's partly we return as we get older, we're more conservative, we return more like to our parents, right? We kind of rebel against the system. There's part of that. It's complex, but anyways, people can read the article and that's in my Substack.
Yeah. So the reality of COVID, there are other ways to keep people healthy. And part of the problems with there was no early treatment during the serious times of the pandemic, the early parts of the pandemic, whereas there's all these different therapeutics that you reference and that I use myself. So what do you think of taking healthcare into your own hands instead of sort of waiting for these expensive and maybe dangerous, maybe not, maybe effective, maybe not. I mean, there's a lot of effective solutions out there from the pharmaceutical things, but I think there's a lot of less expensive and very,
right.
Not dangerous at all.
It comes down to a basic theory. Do you believe is your main focus in the germ theory, or is your focus on the terrain theory? And the germ theory says that we just have to watch out for germs. And when bad germs come, then we take a pharmaceutical approach. And that's the modern Western, industrial, view. The terrain theory is that, yes, there are germs, there are viruses, there are bacteria out there. But if you improve the terrain, so when an invader comes in, your immune system can deal with it, attacker easily. And, it's shown that people had lower vitamin D levels and are more overweight, were much more susceptible to dying from COVID. So I'm a big fan of boosting your immune system, which is one reason, and doing next one reason why eating more, fresh fruits and vegetables, why to eat pasture beef, which has higher levels of vitamin E and more omega-3, and why to do chaga mushrooms. Turkey tail is also really good. I do turkey tail. It's shown to be effective against in COVID, but it gets to be controversial. But like I have a medical doctor friend of mine. Virtually every one of his patients, none of his patients died, and they had thousands of patients that got COVID. He didn't have problems because he did some of the things that you were talking about, including ivermectin. Ivermectin is like they say, oh, that's horse dewormer. That's like horses drink water also, so do humans.
Yeah,
And ivermectin is safer on the scale, safer than aspirin, and it's been used by 4 billion dosages in the
absolutely.
world. 4 billion, not 4 million. So it's encourage people to read the article. We could get into it, but there's a lot of different alternative things you can do, and you don't have to pick one side or the other. Just, boost your immune system. Taking vitamin D in the wintertime is a good thing. Boost your immune system, do better things, and just learn and be open. And the idea is, oh, you did research. It's like, oh, you bought a car and you just trusted the salesman. Like, who pays Don Lemon's salary? Who pays people's salary? The pharmaceutical industry does. Hello?
Yeah. So, in the same spirit, you publicly advocated for Robert Kennedy Jr.'s bid for president, which tracks with your position on big pharma and environmental protection. I would add that I've been a big supporter of his in the past, his long career advocating for clean rivers and stopping mountaintop removal against the purveyors of poison that we've been discussing. He spoke at our march in SoCal 350, my organization, in 2017, with about 100 groups that were supporting us to stop the Tesoro refinery in the Los Angeles harbor area from expanding. He participated in our work against fracking and public banks. Unfortunately, his staunch support for the ongoing Israeli assault on Gaza has hurt his reputation with peace activists like myself. What's your position on his bid for president?
I'm a supporter of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Those people who know me know that because I'm vocal about that. I was on his podcast a year and a half ago. If people don't know much about RFK, it's a good it wasn't just me talking. We kind of had a good dialogue. And we talk a lot about some of the subjects here. Some of the pharmaceutical takeover of the Democratic Party. We talk a lot about the environment and health and the importance of soil health and Impossible Burger and stuff like that. I consider him more of a moderate. Yeah, I'm disappointed in his view on his position on how he's dealt with Gaza and Israel. I mean, I'm a supporter of Israel in terms of being able to be as a nation state in the Middle East, but it doesn't give them the right to destroy Palestinian people at the same time.
Yeah.
You can hold both of those views, and I've met lots of Israelis over my lifetime. And so many of them don't like what's going on. They do not support Netanyahu. They don't support this really inhumane issue that's going on. And, I know both sides are suffering right now. And, what happened on October 7th was horrible. So, you're not going to find a politician that checks the box everything,
I agree.
I've never met a politician that was lined up with my views as much, I think he's got a shot. I mean, it's going to be a challenge. He's got to get on the ballots. He's running as independent. I helped with some friends. We raised $165,000 for RFK Jr. a few months ago. And so, I mean, I like his policy on giving first-time home buyers 3% 30-year mortgage. I think that's a great way to help people get back into the game financially. He wants to end corruption in the agencies, the three-letter agencies in DC. And that's why I support RFK Jr.
Well, good. On another note, as a serial entrepreneur, and you sort of referred to it, what do you think about ESG efforts? We hear this in environmental, social, and corporate governance. Is this a way for corporations to clean up their act, or is it just more greenwashing?
ESG, environmental sustainability and governance, started out as a really good thing. We used to call it corporate responsibility. So the idea is, instead of destroying the local environment, we would just say, hey, it makes better sense. You're a member of the community, good corporate governance. And when I was an entrepreneur, we worked to do that. When I moved Nativa to Richmond, California, we decided to put in a fruit tree orchard at every public school and teach kids about gardening and nutrition and agriculture. And that's what we did. That was one of the examples of what we did as a responsible company in the area as a give back. So it started out as good, but now guess who's one of the top ranked ESG companies in Europe that's given a special index for investors to invest in the best class of environmental sustainable ESG companies?
Is it an oil company or
Bayer?
Oh, Bayer, of course.
I rest my case.
Yeah, we're going the wrong way again, but they have enough money to make themselves look as good as they can. They're putting out that message.
And I want to say one thing I want to say. There's right now, the state of California wants to define the definition of regenerative agriculture. For some reason, they think it's really important, and they're having 5 listening sessions, and they're appointing a commission. They've done a little to promote regenerative agriculture, but not that much. Now they're going to do this definition. And the concern is that they may require that definition has to be certified organic. And organic acres are declining in California, not increasing. And without getting into all the ins and outs, it is potentially a huge blow to the regenerative agriculture movement, because we need to work with the farmers where they're at and take them. But we don't, at the same time, we don't want a lot of greenwashing. It's not a simple, clear-cut answer, but I just wanted to mention that that's an issue that's going to be decided later this year about that.
Yeah, it's really important to have. We have so much of these agencies that are captured. I mean, a lot of us environmental activists and people of a socialist mentality are looking towards a government to regulate, the better world that we'd like to see. But a lot of times these agencies are captured by the very interests that we've been discussing that are turning the world into a mess.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I just want to say, the church committee in the 1970s, showed through documents that the CIA had over 1,000 people in the U.S. media organizations under their payroll, 1,000 of them. And what do you think they've done from 75 to 2024? And the idea to me, that a so-called liberal person, Democrat, would tell me with a straight face that they believe what CNN and the New York Times tells them as fact is the most bizarre example of captured people who have been brainwashed. And the last thing I'll say on that is my Harvard MD that graduated in the top 10% of his class, basically one of the smartest doctors in the country for that year, because Harvard had it's very hard to get into Harvard Medical School. And he said, and he cures people all the time without pharmaceutical drugs. And he said, John, brainwashing, it's very effective. Top Harvard doctor. And he says, John, and you know what? I serve on behalf of the king. He knows.
Well,
he knows.
On that note.
Knows who calls who runs things. But in all of this, though, don't let the bastards get you down. But I just decided to call a spade, but we can create a better world. We got to focus on ourselves. We can help ourselves, help our family, our community. Maybe we can help the world. Maybe we can help in our next lifetime. Maybe this is a lost cause. Some people think like the amount of wars, all these things, but at the same time, there is a lot of potential, and we've got to focus on some of those things. My apologies if I've gone down a little down the rabbit hole of the dark side, but that's kind of my role a little. People kind of get used to that sometimes with me.
That's why we're having you on today, to give us the bad and the good. And thankfully, there's been a lot of good that you've shared. Can you tell our audience how they can get more in touch with you and the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, you can go to my Substack article, my Substack page, and you can follow me there. Also, johnroulac.com is a website, has a lot of my articles and videos. And I'm also on social and on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. Those are my 3 platforms. And they're links all from johnroulac.com.
Well, really appreciate you taking the time from all of your different projects to share with us today. And we wish you the best with all of the work that you're doing. And we'll see that transition happening little by little. So thanks a lot.
Thanks. Remember, let's regenerate, and love is regenerative. Let's have love for the planet, love for people, and we don't have time for hate. I don't hate anyone. That's one other thing I like just mention. Let go of hate.
Yeah.
Don't hate. Don't hate Trump. Don't hate Monsanto. Don't hate your neighbor. That does whatever. Let it go.
Yes, and we need to overcome them. So that's a different story. Yeah, but thank you.
We're not going to do it with hate.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
We got to throw better parties, have better arguments.
Sometimes better arguments don't work just because getting back to the brainwashing issue. But thank you again, and keep at it.
All right. Thank you again. Appreciate taking me on to the show.
Thank you to our guest, John Roulac. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been From Degradation to Regeneration, John Roulac's Eco Vision. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media at EcoJustice Radio, SoCal 350, and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show. Project is SoCal 350. The show can be found on KPFK, KPFT, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Executive producer and host, myself, Jack Eit. Co-host, Jessica Aldridge. Co-host, Carrie Kim. And engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.